All right, everybody. Hello. I'm Thomas, and I do educational videos on this channel. We are on a unit uh, about the reciprocal system of theory, first discovered by Dewey B. Larson. And we've done some autobiographical stuff for me, my experiences with the reciprocal system, and some biographical stuff about Mr. Larson himself. And this is our second installment of looking at his talk that he gave in 1986 when he was 88 years old, maybe 87, 88 years old. And it's called The Outline of the Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. And we're about to start section A, which is called Conceptual Fundamentals. Now, I'm basically just reading his talk, and I may interject with some sidebar comments. If I do so, I will attempt to delineate the difference between just reading what he's saying and what I'm saying so that you don't get confused. But generally, if I'm reading it, I'm going to be looking down. If I'm talking off the top of my head, then I'll be looking up, hopefully. Okay, now we're going into conceptual fundamentals. This theory introduces two new concepts into physical science: the concept of physical location and the concept of scalar motion. The nature of these new concepts can be illustrated by a consideration of the expansion of the universe that is postulated in the astronomers' latest theory of the recession of the distant galaxies. As explained by Paul Davies, the expanding universe is not the motion of the galaxies through space, but is the steady expansion of space. Since the galaxies on this basis are not moving through space, each galaxy remains in what we will call a physical location in space. This physical location is moving outward in the context of the stationary spatial reference system, carrying the galaxy with it. While only the galactic motion can be observed, all physical locations necessarily participate in the outward motion, irrespective of whether or not they are occupied by galaxies. Inasmuch as all galaxies and the physical locations that they occupy are moving uniformly outward from all others, each is moving outward in all directions. A motion distributed uniformly over all directions has no specific or inherent direction. That is, it is scalar. Thus, the expansion can be described as a positive scalar motion of all physical locations, represented as outward in the spatial reference system. Our new theory defines a universe of motion in which scalar motion of physical locations is not a unique phenomenon confined to the expansion recognized by the astronomers, but is the basic form of the motion from which all physical phenomena are derived. Okay, now we're at a section called the basic premises. The basic premises of the theory consist of certain preliminary assumptions, a postulate, and a definition. A. In order to make science possible, some preliminary assumptions of a philosophical nature must be made. We assume that the universe is rational, that the same physical laws apply throughout the universe, that the results of experiments are reproducible, etc. These assumptions are accepted by scientists as a condition of becoming scientists and are not usually mentioned in purely scientific discourse. B, we assume that the generally accepted principles of mathematics, to the extent that they will be used in this development, are valid. We postulate, and this here is his first postulate. Well, no, it isn't. It is part of his first postulate. Well, we'll just say this is C here. We postulate that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions and in discrete units. We define motion, this is D, we define motion as the relation between 2 uniformly progressing reciprocal quantities, space and time. Okay, now this section is called deductive development. Each of the following statements is a deduction from the postulate and the preceding statements. The objective of the deductive development is to determine what can exist in the theoretical universe defined by the premises of the theory. In most cases, it will be evident that the entity or phenomenon that theoretically can exist is identical with one that does exist in the actual physical universe, and there are no definite conflicts in any case. To the extent that the outline has been carried, the theoretical universe is thus a correct representation of the observed physical universe. Okay, so then he has numbers that represent all of these different deductions. I guess this is the start here of his, deductive universe. Motion, as defined, is measured. This is number 1. Motion, as defined, is measured in terms of speed, the scalar magnitude of the relationship between space and time. Okay, and then there's a footnote here. These footnotes are put in by Dr. Bruce Perret, who was the main driver behind the Reciprocal System 2, which is kind of like the re-evaluation of the reciprocal system, which came about after Larson's death. It's pretty much like a revision of the reciprocal system because they insist that Larson got a few things wrong and they're trying to correct them. And I think it's also a monumental correction, the work that Perret did. Now, I think he might have got into speculating at some point, and I don't think that all of his corrections of Larson were needed, but I think he did a great job as well. He also passed away a couple of years ago. The footnote here is, do not consider motion as something moving, but simply a ratio of a quantity of space to a quantity of time. Okay, so I'm going to read that number 1 again. Motion, as defined, is measured in terms of speed, the scalar magnitude of the relation or ratio between space and time. Okay, number 2. By reason of the postulated reciprocal relation between space and time, each individual unit of motion is a relation between one unit of space and one unit of time, a motion at unit speed. Okay, and now the footnote here is a unit is a quantity of one, not a container. You cannot have a box of 45 miles per hour, but you could increase your speed by increments of 45 miles an hour as unit increments. Okay, now number 3. We define the primary motions as those which can exist independently of the existence of motions of other types. Okay, so there are primary motions. Number 4, according to our definition, motion involves a uniform progression of both space and time. We define a point or segment on the line of the space progression at a given time as a physical location in space. Number 5. Inasmuch as we postulate that the universe is three-dimensional, we may represent the scalar progression of space by a line in a stationary three-dimensional spatial reference system, measuring the corresponding progression in time by means of a scalar device, a clock. In this reference system, a positive motion is represented as outward from a reference point, and a negative motion as inward. The terms outward and inward will be used in preference to positive and negative to avoid possible confusion with another use of the latter set of terms. And Perret's footnote here is saying outward can also be considered as away from the reference point, and inward is as towards the reference point. The initial point of the progression of an individual unit of motion is 0. As the distance between 2 points cannot be less than 0, it follows that the primary motions are necessarily outward, increasing the distances relative to the initial points. And the footnote here says, when you are standing on a reference point, whichever direction you move will be away from that reference point, hence outward. Okay, number 7. This progression is scalar. It is simply outward without any inherent direction. Motion outward from the initial point of the progression is therefore outward from all points of reference. And again, another footnote, consider outward scalar motion as expansion and inward scalar motion as compression. Okay, number 8. From the foregoing, any two physical locations are progressing outward from each other at unit speed. That is, their separation is increasing at the rate of 1 unit of space per unit of time. Number 9. We define the natural system of reference as that system in which the primary motions do not cause any change in the positions of physical locations. Number 10. From number 8, it follows that the natural system of reference is progressing outward at unit speed relative to the spatial system of reference. Number 11. We identify unit speed as the speed of light. Okay, now this is an interlude here. The various features of the theoretical universe emerge from the deductive development without labels. It is therefore necessary to identify the physical phenomena to which they correspond. The correlation is usually quite evident, as in this instance. In any event, it is self-verifying, as any error would quickly show up in the subsequent development. Now, I would say that that is true, but except for the word quickly. It is self-verifying, as any error would eventually, I would say instead of quickly. It is self-verifying, as any error would eventually show up in the subsequent development, because it usually didn't happen. It hasn't happened quickly because not enough eyes are on this. Not enough people are keeping track of this, and not enough people understand it so that they are able to like point out errors very quickly, you know. So anyway, back to number 12. Since the postulate specifies that nothing exists other than discrete units of motion, and the natural reference system is a direct consequence of the existence of primary units, this reference system is the framework or background of the universe of motion and does not represent any activity in that universe. The natural system of reference, as defined, is therefore the physical zero or datum level from which all physical activity extend. Okay, so this natural reference system, which is the motion outward in all directions, is the physical zero. Okay, so when we describe something as zero, the physical zero, it's actually something moving in all directions at the speed of light. Okay, number 13. We identify the outward progression of the natural reference system relative to the stationary system of reference as the expansion of the universe reported by astronomers, also known as the Hubble expansion. At this point, we have arrived at, by deduction from our basic premises, at an explanation of the general background of the physical universe that is essentially in agreement with the astronomer's assumption. Our derivation leads to a uniform outward speed rather than a speed that varies with the distance, as produced by the kind of an expansion assumed by the astronomers. But this difference is easily accounted for because there is a known force, gravitation, that acts against the outward motion with a magnitude varying as an inverse function of the distance. Now again here, Larson is assuming gravitation as being a known force, even though I don't think that that's really true. It's an assumed force, or, you know, something that they've come up with. But I don't think that it's necessarily known. Okay, this will be the last paragraph here. So we did the first 13. The advantage of deriving this explanation of the universal background from a set of general premises, rather than merely assuming its existence, lies in the fact that further deductions can be made from these same premises. Instead of a single process involving the universe as a whole, the explanation is that we have just derived from the premises of the theory of the universe of motion, identifies the expansion as the result of outward scalar motions of individual physical locations. This opens the way for the existence of other scalar motions of the same physical locations, independent motions, as we will call them. Okay, so, basically he's just talking about kind of this big picture astronomically. We've got this expansion of the universe, and he sees this as being part of the scalar expansion that is actually the zero of the universe. The expansion in all directions at the speed of light is the neutral point, or the zero, or the datum of the universe. Okay, now stay tuned. We'll be and go back and look at the previous videos if you get confused, or you need some background. You can also donate to me through Cash App or Venmo listed in the description. Otherwise, have a great day.